Want to stay up to date with everything that's happening on the show? Or do you have a story that you'd like to submit for one of our Listener Stories episodes? You can get in touch with the show via the website at www.hauntedukpodcast.com, on Instagram at hauntedukpodcast, on X at hauntedukpod, or you can email us at contactus@hauntedukpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook and TikTok. And if you want to support the show, you can do it via either Patreon or Ko-fi. Both platforms have exactly the same content, but work in slightly different ways. One of the advantages of Patreon is its sleek user interface. But if you want to avoid those pesky additional charges that Apple, Google, and Patreon apply to your subscription, then why not give Ko-fi a try? Simply open a browser window and type ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast, and you'll soon find us. Whichever platform you choose, we're sure you'll enjoy the bonus content. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the episode. Located on the banks of the Mississippi River, New Orleans is famous for many things, such as jazz music, Creole and Cajun cuisine, and a rich cultural heritage that blends African, Native American, Spanish, Caribbean, and French ancestry. Nicknamed the Big Easy, New Orleans conjures up images of Mardi Gras parades with their colorful purple, green, and gold bead necklaces, and bands walking the streets playing to roaring crowds. But the joyful, celebratory side of New Orleans has an equally dark, somber, and much more frightening side. This is Haunted UK Abroad, and today we visit the southern state of Louisiana in the US, and specifically the by all accounts very haunted city of New Orleans. The city of New Orleans was founded by the French in 1718, then vacillate between Spanish and French rule until the United States acquired it in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. In the decades that followed, New Orleans became the southern United States' largest trading port and grew to be one of the largest cities in the South by the time the Civil War broke out in 1861. In the decades that followed, the city was overtaken by outbreaks of yellow fever, malaria, cholera, and smallpox, then ravaged by the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927, an event which certainly echoed in the minds of the city's population during the hurricanes of 2005 and 2021. Given this tumultuous and storied history, New Orleans is ripe with a variety of haunted locations, stories, and legends, some of which have been shared across its many cultures. Let's start with a proper ghost story, featuring the city's most famous haunted house, the LaLaurie Mansion. Situated on a popular street corner, the LaLaurie Mansion was built in 1832 and was home to Delphine LaLaurie, her third husband, Dr. LaLaurie, and their son. As was common at the time, the LaLauries owned slaves. It is speculated that Delphine's treatment of these slaves may play a large role in the hauntings experienced at the mansion in subsequent years. Delphine LaLaurie was a high society woman with a reputation for being both wealthy and influential. She was known for her beauty and graceful manner in elite circles. However, behind the facade of glitz and glamour, Delphine had a very dark, terrifying side. Word began to spread around town that she was rather brutal in the treatment of her slaves. which began to cast a shadow over her gilded reputation. The true horror, however, was worse than anyone could have imagined. Things came to light one fateful day in 1834, when a fire broke out at the mansion during one of the lavish, high society parties often hosted by the LaLauries. As firefighters walked through the attic of the home, they discovered a scene worthy of a horror film. There were slaves crammed into boxes, body parts strewn across the floor, and several dead slaves whose bodies were still chained to the walls. Rumors began to spread that Delphine was conducting torturous experiments on her slaves, leaving them maimed, debilitated, or dead. The citizens of New Orleans were horrified and enraged. They gathered at the mansion to call for the LaLauries to pay for their crimes, but the couple had already escaped the city and were rumored to have fled to Paris. Of course, with the amount of time that has gone by, it's hard to know how much truth these stories truly hold. While it's certain Delphine did mistreat her slaves, we'll never know if the scene in the attic was truly as horrific as the stories portray. One thing that may point to there being some level of truth to them, however, came some 20 years after the fire, when during renovations of the home, several corpses were found hidden beneath the floorboards of the house. The mansion's dark history has no doubt left a dark, heavy feeling of despair and misery, which has been reported by subsequent owners and visitors to the house. There have been reports of apparitions in the upper windows of the home, visitors stating that they hear moans, cries, and even the sound of chains rattling. Some believe the house's dark atmosphere has the reputation of following past residents after they move out and bringing tragedy and hardship into their lives. One of the mansion's more famous previous owners was actor Nicolas Cage, who, after living in the home for only a short period of time, found himself declaring bankruptcy and sending the home into foreclosure. The LaLaurie Mansion is now a private home and not available for public tours. However, just half a mile away is a restaurant called Muriel's, where one can enjoy a proper New Orleans-style meal, providing they don't mind eating in one of the city's most haunted buildings. Muriel's is a cultural landmark located in New Orleans' world-famous French Quarter. Its architecture is typical of French and Spanish colonial design, with picturesque wrought iron balconies on the facade. The restaurant serves typical New Orleans fare such as gumbo, jambalaya, and crawfish etouffee. Hauntings on the side at no extra charge. One of the main events in Muriel's dark history goes back to the time before the current structure was built, when the site was home to a small cottage used to house slaves and servants. The cottage was torn down and a new structure built which housed several families, until it fell victim to the Great New Orleans Fire of 1788. The property was then purchased by a man named Pierre Antoine Jourdain, who restored it to its original opulence and beauty. Pierre felt a particular attachment to the home, having lovingly brought it back to life over the course of several years, but in 1814 he lost the residence in a poker game. Unable to bring himself to hand over the property, Pierre took his own life in the house. Today, the second-floor space where Pierre met his end has been converted into a séance lounge, decorated with vintage furniture and luxurious red velvet drapery. It's no surprise, given his love for the property, that Pierre's spirit would linger in this space. Guests have reported feeling cold spots, seeing flickering lights drift through the space, and even witnessing the ghost of Pierre Jourdain himself. The belief in the ghost's presence is so strong that a table is perpetually set for him in the séance lounge, with bread and wine to appease his restless soul. The séance lounge isn't the only haunted part of Muriel's. There have been countless paranormal encounters reported by both staff and guests over the years, many of them occurring in the restaurant courtyard. From shadowy figures and disembodied voices to poltergeist-type activity that sees drinkware being shattered against the brick wall, and the full-body apparition of the lady in white, who either glides through the courtyard or stands solemnly by the fountain, Muriel's appears to have it all. Who doesn't love the story of a theatre ghost? Le Petit Théâtre du Vieux Carré, which translates to the Little Theatre in the Square, is one of the United States' longest-running local theatres. In its century-long history, the theatre has seen much tragedy, which has certainly contributed to its haunted reputation. One of the first tragic events at this location occurred in the 1930s, when a young actress named Caroline fell to her death from an upper railing. Making the terrible scene even more dramatic, she was donning a wedding dress in preparation of that evening's performance. Since then, Caroline's ghost is said to haunt the theatre, making itself visible to countless actors, crew members, and theatre patrons. Some claim she even still participates in the show by moving props around and making disembodied sounds at opportune moments during a performance. One actress claimed she was alone in her dressing room when she witnessed a woman in white standing in the doorway. At that moment, a cool breeze blew through the room, despite all the windows being tightly closed. The actress described the ghost looking at her with a sorrowful gleam in her eye before slowly vanishing. In stark contrast to the ghost of Caroline in her white dress, another famous apparition is that of a man in a black suit whom patrons have dubbed the Phantom. No one seems to know who this man is or when he may have died, but he is typically spotted backstage watching the cast and crew. There's speculation he may have been an actor or even a former manager, perhaps from the theatre's beginnings. Either way, those who have encountered him agree he carries a particular chill about him and causes a deep sense of unease. Many people encounter the paranormal in religious buildings, and New Orleans is no exception. The St. Louis Cathedral, located in the French Quarter, is the oldest continually operating church in America. It also happens to be home to several ghosts, the most famous of which are Père Dagobert, who was originally from Quebec but came to New Orleans in 745 to become head priest, and Pierre Antoine, a Spanish friar who arrived in 1774 to take on the same position. Pierre Dagobert was held in high regard for the kindness and dedication he showed to the poor of New Orleans. He ran the local charity hospital for several years and attended countless weddings, births, and funerals of people in his congregation. Pierre Antoine was also beloved by the people of New Orleans, who embraced his thoughtfulness and generosity, as well as the attention he paid to the less fortunate. He dedicated much of his work to serving the poor, prisoners, and slaves. On an interesting note, he was the one who baptized the famous voodoo priestess Marie Laveau when she was a child. Together, they fought for the rights of slaves and the less fortunate. We'll hear more about Marie Laveau later in this episode. Upon Pierre Antoine's death in 1829, the entire city went into mourning. He was entombed inside the cathedral, and since then, there have been countless reports from people who have witnessed his ghost. He's easily recognizable due to his portrait hanging on the cathedral wall. Both the holy men's ghosts have been seen inside the cathedral and in the alleyways on either side of the building. Records of sightings go back over 100 years, with witnesses claiming to also see the priests in various parts of the city, such as St. Louis Cemetery and the French Quarter. One of the stories that may contribute to the hauntings at St. Louis Cathedral involves a group of French Creole rebels after Spain took over the city in 1768, ousted the newly installed Spanish governor. Angered, Spain sent soldiers to crush the revolt, rounding up and shooting any remaining Creole ringleaders. Père Dagobert ignored Spain's instructions to leave the bodies unburied. He braved the disapproving gaze of the Spanish soldiers and collected the bodies so he could bury them on the church grounds. Some believe his ghost lingers to watch over the rebels whose souls he spared with a proper burial. Like every other haunted location we've touched on, New Orleans does not disappoint when it comes to its most famous gravesite, St. Louis Cemetery. Largely considered one of the most haunted cemeteries in the United States, St. Louis Cemetery holds over 700 tombs, 100,000 dead, and counting, as it is still an active burial site. With over 300 years of people reporting ghostly encounters, and its walking paths comprised of broken shells and cobblestones, as well as the crumbling crypts and haphazard layout of the tombs, it's only too easy to envision any number of ghosts wandering around the labyrinth that is the cemetery. Of course, such an environment is bound to skew one's imagination toward having a supernatural experience, but not every report of the paranormal can be explained away this easily. One of the many ghostly residents of St. Louis Cemetery is that of Henry Vignes. Henry was a sailor in the 19th century. Largely considered a nomad, he had no specific place to call home and would stay at a local boarding house when in New Orleans. On one occasion, as he was preparing to set sail again, he entrusted some important papers with the owner of the boarding house, worried that something might happen to them were he to perish at sea. The boarding house owner ensured Henry she would take care of his papers, and that his worry was unnecessary as all would go well. Unfortunately for Henry, the boarding house owner had ill intentions, and her assurances that all would go well were wrong. Dead wrong. Among Henry's important papers were documents detailing his family's burial plots. The boarding house owner sold his family tomb while he was away, and upon his return, Henry was unable to rectify the situation through both legal and not-so-legal means. Shortly thereafter, Henry fell ill and died. Because this family tomb had been sold, Henry's body was buried in an unmarked grave amongst the paupers in St. Louis Cemetery. In the 100-plus years that have ensued, Henry's ghost has been seen aimlessly wandering between the graves, perhaps looking for the burial plot that should have been his. Witnesses say there is a depth of sadness in his blue eyes, and he appears so real, several people have actually spoken to him when he approached to ask where the Vignes tomb is located. His apparition is even said to have attended several funerals, where he sometimes asks if there is any additional space in the tomb for him. There is allegedly camera footage of Henry's ghost, which captured a male voice saying, "I need to rest." Sadly for Henry, the promise of rest does not seem to lie in his future. How tragic to think he may be wandering St. Louis Cemetery for eternity. Henry isn't the only wandering soul at this location. Perhaps due to its labyrinth-like layout, the term lost soul seems particularly appropriate here. Like Henry, the lifelike ghost of Alphonse has spent countless years searching for a place to rest his soul. He's said to stop visitors by grasping their hands, then smiling as he asks them to bring him home. He has also been seen collecting flowers from other people's tombs to deposit them on his own. Some believe Alphonse was killed by a member of the Pinede family because stepping near the Pinede family graves causes him to appear with a warning to stay away. Undoubtedly, the most famous ghostly inhabitant of St. Louis Cemetery is that of Marie Laveau, also known as the Voodoo Queen. Born in 1801, Marie would grow to become the most sought-after and sometimes the most feared voodoo practitioner in New Orleans, an honor she still holds to this day, nearly 150 years after her death. Her skills included fortune-telling, herbal remedies, and a deep knowledge of the occult. She used these skills to eventually infiltrate the highest levels of society, gaining people's trust as she helped sort their problems using rituals and spells. Marie was also known locally for being deeply caring and helping those less fortunate. She adopted orphan children, nursed the sick, and fed the hungry. She helped enslaved servants and escapees find freedom. Marie's ghost lingers in various parts of the French Quarter, including her former house on Anne Street. Anyone even vaguely familiar with this famous historical figure would recognize her ghost in an instant, as she was known to wear brightly colored clothes and a large red and white turban around her hair. Her ghost has been spotted weaving its way between the tombs of St. Louis Cemetery, but beware of showing disregard for her beliefs and methods, as it has been reported people who scoff at Marie or Voodoo in general have left the cemetery with scratch marks, or even been pinched or pushed to the ground. Some speculate Marie was brought back to life through a powerful voodoo spell. Whatever the case, it is advised to approach her apparition with a dose of caution and respect. While we're on the subject, there are many misconceptions about voodoo, which carries a fascinating history and strong cultural significance. Brought to Louisiana by enslaved West Africans who merged their rituals with those of the local Catholic population, New Orleans voodoo has its own distinct flavor. It is a belief system with strong ties to nature, spirits, and ancestors. There was a rise in voodoo practices upon the arrival of Haitian refugees after the 1791 slave revolt. The number of followers grew as free people of color embraced voodoo as part of their cultural identity. By the 1800s, voodoo kings and queens commanded respect and held tremendous power within the spiritual and political ranks of New Orleans. At the core of voodoo is the belief that a singular god does not interfere in the daily lives of humans. Instead, it is spirits that are capable of such a thing. Therefore, the ability to connect with spirits through various rituals involving dance, music, and chanting is prized. There is also a strong healing and medicinal component to voodoo that often gets overlooked, with practices such as spiritual baths and personal ceremonies that aim to alleviate or cure symptoms of anxiety, addiction, and depression, as well as helping those who are poor, hungry, or ill. Even today, the average household contains gree-gree dolls, talismans, and potions, which can all easily be found in local shops. Before there was Marie Laveau, there was her teacher, one of the most famous voodoo kings in New Orleans history. He went by the name of Dr. John. Dr. John was born in Africa, where he was kidnapped as a child, enslaved, and brought to Cuba. He eventually made his way to New Orleans and slowly grew to be an important healer and fortune teller within the local voodoo community. Another famous figure in the community was a voodoo priestess by the name of Julia Brown. Julia would use her skills in magic and healing to assist people in need, but as her reputation and power grew, she became more negative and bitter to the degree that by the time she reached her later years, she outwardly declared that when she died, she was going to take the entire town with her. It is said that on the day of her funeral in the early 1900s, a powerful hurricane destroyed much of the town, killing a significant number of its residents in the process. Is it possible that Julia cursed the town? Or had she perhaps seen a vision of what was to come and simply shared that vision with the townspeople who misinterpreted it as a threat? Whatever the case, the legend of Julia Brown lingers in the region still, causing people to use her name sparingly and with fearful respect. We now pivot to a different but equally important cultural aspect of New Orleans: Cajun culture. But before diving into their stories, let's explore who the Cajun people are at their origin. Louisiana Cajuns are an ethnic group who originated in the primarily French colony of Acadia in eastern Canada, which is known today as the Maritimes and includes Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. In the mid-1700s, thousands of Acadians were deported during the French and Indian War when they fell under suspicion of being French allies. This was known as the Le Grand Dérangement, or the Great Expulsion in English, which saw many Acadians being resettled far from the home they had always known. Some Acadians, however, managed to elude capture and keep their culture alive where it still exists today in parts of eastern Canada and Quebec. Cajun culture includes a rich oral storytelling history ripe with legends, superstitions, myths, and spells. Some of these legends will feel familiar as they involve creatures such as Lougarou, the Cajun equivalent of the werewolf, Feu Follet, also known as will-o'-the-wisp in other parts of the world, and Père Malfait, their equivalent of the bogeyman. The Lougarou, also called Rougarou, differs from the werewolf in that it has a human body with a wolf's head. Considered a shapeshifter, it can easily change from human to wolf form, or an alternative animal if it finds itself in an area where wolves aren't common. It is said the Lougarou tends to keep to the swamps, where it antagonizes people in the hope of getting close enough to draw blood from them, which allows it to return to human form. In some versions of the legend, the Lougarou is a cursed human who is trapped in that form until they pass the curse onto someone else. Père Malfait, the boogeyman, also resides in the swamps and is said to be a human-like creature covered in moss with a pair of glowing yellow eyes. The creature is said to possess superhuman strength that allows it to crush its victims with little effort, often vanishing shortly thereafter and leaving only a pile of moss and leaves behind. Legend has it the only way to kill Père Malfait is to fashion a stake from the swamp gum tree and drive it through its heart. A popular culture reference to Père Malfait comes from the 1970s television show Kolchak, the Night Stalker, in the episode The Spanish Moss Murders, where Père Malfait is created and brought to life through the mind of a sleep deprivation study participant. Feu Follet, or Feu Follet, known as will-o'-the-wisp in the UK, has the same history of mysterious lights being encountered in the woods or over swampland. In Cajun folklore, much like in other parts of the world, these dancing lights draw people into the swamps, where they become disoriented and meet an untimely end. Another popular story stemming from the Cajun culture is that of the Casket Girls of New Orleans. This story originates in the 1700s when a group of young French women came to the city. They'd been shipped to New Orleans as prospective brides in an effort to both populate and civilize the colony. However, upon their arrival, local inhabitants couldn't help but notice something strange about the girls and the luggage they had in tow. Their travel chests were shaped like caskets, and rumors began to spread that they didn't contain clothing or trinkets, but instead housed vampires. Legend has it, the caskets were stored at a local convent, where a nun came upon them one night and investigated, only to find them empty. The immediate conclusion was that the vampires who had secretly traveled from Europe had now taken residence in the city. Perhaps this is in part what inspired Anne Rice, as New Orleans is central to her book Interview with the Vampire. Another eerie cryptid of Cajun lore is the Honey Island Swamp Monster, Louisiana's version of Bigfoot. Like its fellow cryptids, the Lougarou and Père Malfait, this creature also inhabits one of Louisiana's many swamps. It is said to have yellow eyes, webbed feet, and a large humanoid body covered in thick fur. The first sighting of the creature is relatively recent and occurred in the 1960s when a pair of hunters reportedly encountered it while out on a hunt. One of the popular, but scientifically impossible, beliefs is that the creature was born of the mating between escaped chimpanzees from a local circus and alligators commonly found in the swamps. Whether it's real or not, the creature has been a convenient scapegoat for mysterious animal deaths and unexplained noises ringing through the night. Another legendary Cajun figure in New Orleans is Jean Lafitte, a pirate who somehow managed to walk the fine line between hero and villain. Lafitte was a real person born in the late 1700s, and yes, he really was a pirate. He primarily operated in the Gulf of Mexico, where he made his fortune by smuggling goods. He had deep ties to the New Orleans underworld and was largely viewed as a criminal. This view changed, however, during the War of 1812, when Lafitte helped defend the city from the British, thus earning himself a pardon from the government. Despite his newfound title of a war hero, Lafitte carried on with his pirate ways, living life on the edge and making an exit that left people wondering whether he truly had died, or whether he had instead faked his death to carry on his operations under an assumed name. No talk of legends and cryptids would be complete without a vampire tale. Bayou Goula is a small community nestled on the Mississippi River. It is neither large nor famous, which also applies to the legend of its resident vampire. At first, his appealing demeanor and charming manners won over town's residents, but they soon grew suspicious when a string of deaths appeared to follow his arrival. Several bodies were found completely drained of blood, leading to a flash flood of rumors and speculation that the charming stranger was in fact a vampire. The deaths carried on until one day, the stranger vanished as quickly and mysteriously as he had appeared. From that day on, residents of Bayou Goula remained suspicious of any strangers or outsiders, a stark contrast to the festive, celebratory nature of the city of New Orleans. And it's this story that brings us to the conclusion of this episode, as the Haunted UK enjoys a summer abroad. Remember, if you visit the amazing city of New Orleans, choose wisely when selecting an eating establishment, or you may find an unwanted and long-departed guest at your table. And beware of who approaches you in a cemetery or in the alleyway by the church, and definitely be on guard if walking the streets of the French Quarter late at night, because the next person to be haunted abroad could be you.